Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have you here today. We're going to have a really good time talking about the money wound. And don't cringe when I say we're going to have a good time because we're going to have a really good time. My intention and my goal for you is to hopefully get you to walk away today with a new insight, some new perspectives, for you to be completely open and receptive to exploring new and powerful ways that you can continue to expand on creating abundance in every area of your life. So, I want to talk about this story about money and money wounding, um, kind of from a little bit of a different perspective than I've ever talked about it before. So, I want to just say, uh, you know, you've probably heard people talk about their money story. It's not an uncommon thing that you'll see in the world of thought leadership. There's a lot of people talking about, I was broke and then I figured out whatever this mysterious secret was, and then poof, voila, I made millions of dollars. And I certainly will tell you that I personally have a very similar story. I definitely was broke, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But before we talk about money stories, and I share with you a little bit about my money story, I want to just say this. If you are really mightily struggling with money, and that's not uncommon, you're not alone, and it's going to get better. It might not get better tomorrow. You might hear information about consciously manifesting, about money, about abundance, and you might feel suspicion or doubt. You might roll your eyes. You might feel a little jaded. I get it. I totally get it. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to get better. It's going to get better incrementally. It's going to get better for some of you instantly, but it is going to get better. And I want to encourage you, if you're finding yourself in a space where you really feel like, wow, my whole financial bottom is just seemingly a dark hole, I want to encourage you with the hope and the promise that it's going to get better. It's going to get better. So I want to invite you to walk into the information that we talk about today with that being kind of your baseline. I want to invite you to walk into the information I'm going to share with you today with this quiet mantra that says it's going to get better. And it will. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story because I want you just to be present to how my story feels for you, and for you to look at how perhaps some of the symptoms that I experienced as somebody who struggled mightily for years might have already been showing up in your life, and that the symptoms might be rooted in something you don't expect. So I could tell you, I've been bankrupt. I've been over $80,000 in debt, which that was a huge amount for me at that time. It's a huge amount, period, the end. But at that time, it was like an insurmountable amount of debt. I have lost a house to foreclosure. I've had my car repossessed. And some of you have heard my story of running after the repo man with my car in the middle of the night with my newborn baby in my arms and my flimsy nursing gown on, because I had to stop him because he was driving off with my car seat and my wallet. I have robbed Peter to pay Paul for more decades than I even want to count at this point. And I can tell you it's different for me now. It's better for me now. And it did not get better instantly. It got better incrementally, 1% a day. And what I really want to talk about today is not so much my story, because we all have similar stories. What I want to talk to you about is some of the symptoms that I had that led to the manifestation of my story that I didn't realize were symptoms of my financial challenge until much later when I look back on my story. So I'll say that the very first symptom that I had of struggling with money, and let me tell you guys, I come from an extremely wealthy family. There's no reason for me to have been broke, if you will, right? But I was. And so the very first symptom, I would say, of my financial consciousness and my struggles with money actually happened for me in grade school. I was an early adopter on the anxiety bandwagon. I had horrible social anxiety as a kid. I was bullied. I never felt like I fit in. I was always the kid. My last name was Pope. as a kid. Think about what rhymes with Pope. There were so many terrible songs that the kids sang about me. And I couldn't wait to get out of school. And I couldn't wait to get out into the world. School was hell for me. And that was probably my very first red flag about struggling with the money wound. And some of you may relate to that. When I started dating as a young adult, I had a tendency to fall in love with people's potentials and to be wildly codependent and to basically lead men by their nostrils into their evolution. It usually didn't stick, and I ended up being burned out, exhausted, and also usually paying all the bills. Some of you may relate to that. That same pattern carried into my marriage, and I got married at a very early age. My first few years of my marriage, I was going to school. I got 2 degrees in 3 years. I worked 60 hours a week in addition to going to school, putting both myself and my husband through school. He stayed on the couch for most of that time because he couldn't work because he was too tired. He took 2 classes. I took 24 hours and I paid all the bills. Some of you might relate to that. That was actually one of the root problems when our marriage came apart. And when our marriage came apart, I got full-time support of our kids. Full-time support, meaning I had them all the time, 24/7, and I was responsible for feeding them all and clothing them all and paying all the bills because I never got a penny of child support. That was also a symptom of my money wound. And that wounding wasn't about the things that we're told it's about. It wasn't because I wasn't working hard. I was working very hard. It wasn't because I wasn't smart with my money. I had to be very smart with my money. I had a finite amount and I had to figure out how to get all those bills paid and not get kicked out of my house every month because I was renting, right? Or I couldn't pay my mortgage and then I did get kicked out when I lost my house. I want to tell you that the money wound doesn't necessarily have anything to do with money. It has everything to do with your self-worth and a couple of other things we're going to talk about today. I also want to tell you, as I said, it's going to get better. But learning how to heal the money wound is kind of like riding a bike. So when you put a kid on a bike, anybody ever put a kid on a bike? Very few kids, if any, when they get on the bike can instantly ride a bike, right? It's a process. You got to have training wheels and you got to learn how to pedal. And then eventually, you lift the training wheels up a little bit and up a little bit. And then you take the training wheels off, right? And then you're running behind the kid. And then eventually, they're riding and you're like running behind, sort of, psychically holding them up, and they fall off. It's a guarantee they're going to fall off. I had one kid that would literally would run into walls and trash cans and all kinds of things because he never went slow. Still doesn't go slow. But they get back on and eventually they learn. And the thing that's so interesting to learn, to remember, is it's not just that they learn how to ride the bike. If you grow up and then you decide you're going to continue to ride the bike, you still kind of take that same risk. You still fall off your bike, even as a grown-up sometimes. I literally just did that 2 weeks ago. And if you start to get professional with it, like if you start to get a carbon bike and you want to race and you want to ride, I live where there's a lot of hills. There's always people riding their really fancy, like $10,000 bikes. You're going to fall off on those bikes too. But you keep getting back up and you keep riding and you keep gaining speed and you keep gaining momentum. Healing the money wound is just like riding a bike. The thing that's so important to understand is that it's not like you're going to learn advanced skills on the bike other than maybe learning to spin. You might get a more expensive bike, but the right act of riding the bike stays the same. And so part of what we're going to be talking about today might feel like it's repeat information. It might be stuff you've heard before. But the thing is, every time you hear it, you're hearing it because it's really important. It's repeating itself, or you might hear me repeating information because it's important. Because the core principles of creating abundance, of aligning with abundance, are the same. They're the same. And every time you get back on that bike and you start to up level and you start to expand and you start to get better and better at it, every time you move up a level, you have to recalibrate. And you're not going to recalibrate with something more complicated, more fancy, more complex. You're going to continue to come back to recalibrating with the basics. And so if it feels like you have to go back to basics, that's actually good. That's normal and that's healthy. And that's part of what happens as we go through the cycle of learning how to ride the bike that is the money wheel, and to go through that journey of healing that money wound and staying on that course, that journey, Hopefully you'll get to where you can spin and go really fast up and down the hills, get into that journey of being in the flow of that abundance. If you're having to start over, if you're having to relearn, if you're having to go back to basics, it's not that you screwed up. It's that you're just recalibrating. You always have to go back and recalibrating. And so I'm excited to have you here, and I'm excited to really use this time to open up your mind to plant the seeds of either new information and helping you prepare your mind for healing the money wound, or to plant the seeds of information so that you can be ready to learn something new or hear something that you've heard before, but maybe from a different lens or a different perspective, a different point of view that's going to give you a whole new way of learning to heal the money wound and to ride your bike.